Welcome back to part 2 of our first-person collectible game. Let's get that score on screen. So obviously we've got the list of what we're going to try and do over the next 15 minutes. Let's make our score display. So Unity user interface, Unity UI, is a funny old beast, and you'll see why in a minute. But what we would like to take is from part 1. Our player capsule currently has a script which is called score, which can be accessed by clicking scripts. There's our score we did in part 1. Alternatively, you can click on the player capsule, scroll right down to the score script, and double click on the word score that is grayed out, and that will take you to the script in exactly the same way. What we now want to do is to use the UI element. So we would like to be using a new component we're not currently using. Now, if you look at the top of your script, you'll see that we're using a Unity engine. That means we can access services like onTriggerEnter. What we would like to do at the end of line 1, right at the very end, press enter. We would also like to be using Unity engine .ui for user interface, semicolon, to say that you're done. It'll be grayed out because we're not doing anything with it yet. At the end of line 6, if we press enter, we would now like a publicly accessible Unity element. Now, I've just realized that what we're going to do in particular, it's not Unity engine that we want. It's also, we want to be using Text Mesh Pro, which is TM Pro. We're also going to need that. So I just went back up to line 3 and I want TM Pro, uppercase TMP, row, semicolon to say that you're done. Back to line 8. We want a publicly accessible Text Mesh Pro U GUI. Stupid name. Text Mesh Pro U GUI. Remember, GUI in this context means a graphical user interface. That's what GUI is pronounced as. Some people say GUI, some people say GUI. I read GUI. So I'd like Text Mesh Pro U GUI, and I would like to give it a name. And I'm going to call it Score Output. Notice I've spelled this with a lowercase s, but an uppercase O, and I haven't put a space between them. Semicolon to say that you are done. Now, when we enter into our trigger, when we touch our coin, destroy the other thing, and make the score go up by 1, and at the end of the line press enter to move down, we now want to do an extra thing. Just tell the score output to set its text to equal something. And the thing we want it to equal, this context, so the equals here is saying, I want the text to say something, to display something. And I want it to display whatever the score is. Problem is, the score is a number, it's an integer, but I need to convert it to text to be displayed. And the handy dandy tooltip here is telling me what I would like to do. I want to take the score and convert it to a string. I'm going to take score, dot, convert that to a string. I can select it from the option, or I can press tab and it will auto-complete for me. So you want your open and close brackets at the end and a semicolon to say that you are done. Notice again, you've got to save it. If I go back to Unity now, it'll compile for a second, and I should have a fresh space here for, all right, what score output do you want us to change? Now you'll notice there's no score on screen for the player to adjust. That's what we're going to do. To make a graphical interface to actually edit, we do that by going to Game Object, UI for user interface, and we would like to make a piece of text. So to do that, we're going to move across to text using Text Mesh Pro. Now this is where things get weird. What this will do is create for you, once we've imported Text Mesh Pro Essentials, it will create an enormous rectangle. So let's just close that down. This enormous, and I mean enormous, rectangle will be absolutely huge. And it won't make a lot of sense why. But this will get overlaid on top of your screen. So if I go to game mode up here, you'll now see where it's going to put that text. Ignore the restore up. That's a graphics glitch on my computer. But you see it's displaying the text. Say new text over here. And if I go back to scene, it's not an easy way of editing that. But if I go to 2D mode, which is up here, if I press 2D, and zoom out and zoom out and zoom out and zoom out some more and zoom out some more and keep zooming out and zoom out some more. Or I can double click on the canvas over here, it will do the same job. What this gives you is it gives you a visual representation of what it is that you're dealing with, your canvas size. And you can see that the text is in the bottom left hand corner, which if I go back to game mode is exactly where we see it, in the bottom left hand corner. Off the screen, I can only see the W, and then text. So I can move that. I can grab the text, and because I'm in 2D mode, it will snap nicely to parts of the screen. So if I wanted that snapped in the middle or the bottom or somewhere else, you can align it. Now there's a lot more you can do with user interface. This is just a really simple intro, but you can resize using the blue control areas, just like on a text box. Text doesn't resize with a text box. If you want to resize it, you change it over here. You can change any properties you like. You can change what it says by default. But ultimately, in a minute, code will override whatever we say there because it's going to display whatever the score is. So what I'm going to get it to say instead is the word score, and that will get overwritten by whatever the score is later on. So if I want to go back into 3D mode, I can click back from that 2D button, but my whole world is currently just down here and it's a right faff to go and find it. Usually best to double click just on your player capsule and it will take you straight back to that world. You can double click on your canvas to go and view the canvas, or double click on your capsule to go back to your player world. If I press play, something interesting is going to happen. I expect an error. New Unity is quite good. I expected an error, but what you can see here is I've got the word score, but as I try and collect these coins, I get a red error down the bottom, and I'll get that error message every single time I go and collect a coin. So if I click on console, I got 3 errors, which you may get like this view or this view. Every time I collected a coin, it threw an error, and it threw the same error. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. That error you will see all the time, and here's why. I'm going to leave play mode. With our player capsule selected, if I scroll down to the bottom, you will see it doesn't know what piece of text to change when I collect a coin. It doesn't know what the score text box is. So to do that, I'm going to grab the word text over here, not the space underneath it or the space above it, the actual thing that says text. I'm going to make sure player capsule is selected. I'm going to left click and drag that into the score box, and it will go blue to say that is accessible. Here's how you can get that wrong. Okay, if you left click on the word text before you drag it, so left click, it will change you and show you the properties for text. What you have to do is have player capsule selected, click and hold and hold and hold and hold and hold and drop. That's the best way to do it. Now, if I play the game, it should reset those errors. And hopefully the word score will go from score to 1, to 2, to 3. Not very exciting, and we're going to tidy that up through code. So I'm going to reopen our code, which you can get to by clicking there or reopening here. I no longer want it to say whatever the score is. I don't want it to say 0, 1, 2, or 3. I want it to say the word score, colon, space, and then how many points we've got. So to do that, I'm going to modify this line of code to say, in double quotes, I want the string to say score, colon, space, and then at the end of the double quotes, I'm going to use an and, well, I'm going to use a plus. And what that means is display everything here. And remember, space is a character. So it's going to display SCORE colon space, followed by whatever our score is. Let's press save. I'm testing again. I now expect score, colon, space. It will still say score because that's different. Score 1, score 2, score 3. And that is so much better. Okay. Next bit on our tutorial, enemies. This is where we're going to realise the error of our ways. Because what we want to do is to have another enemy that is going to be a static enemy with a collider on it. But we already have a static object with a collider on it. And it may prove that we have to modify our script to detect whether it is a coin, which should give us some points, or if it is a spike that should take some points away and restart us. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have a new object, game object, 3D object, and I'm going to represent this with a cube will do. And this cube is going to represent our baddie. So let's give it an appropriate name. Just like before, I would like enemy to have a collider on it, which it does by default. There's its box collider. And if I walk over to it, I shouldn't be able to walk through it. You can see I cannot walk through it. But I'm going to change that so its box collider is now a trigger. I should be able to walk through it. And actually, because of our code from before, it will think it is a coin and I expect my score to go up, which it did. Obviously, we don't want that. We don't want our score to go up every time we touch an enemy. That doesn't make sense. We need to differentiate between coins, which are good, and enemies, which are bad. So let's go back to our score script and we're going to modify it. There's our score script. And we're going to modify it here. Now, good practice would be we would write a second script, one that manages health, and that would be a much better way of managing this. For our first tutorial, we're going to keep it simple. So the score script is now going to do two jobs. It's also going to monitor our health. So we're going to create a new variable here, public integer, because you can only have a certain number of lives or health, whatever you want to call it. Now, I want to call this health. It starts life at 3. Start life at 3 health. But it still doesn't tell us when we touch something what that thing is. It will always destroy it. The score will always go up and it will always display our score going up. What we want is to do those 3 things if the thing we touched was a coin, and if it was an enemy, have something else happen. To do that, we can use tags. So back to our game view, and I can select this coin. I can select this coin with a control left click, or I can control left click over here, all 3 of those coins, and you can see that they are currently untagged. I can choose a tag, and there's a bunch of them that exist, but none of them really say coin or points or something I can use. So let's make a new tag, add tag. Here we can click the plus icon and we can create a new tag, which I'm going to call coin. Notice the spelling matters here. That is a capital letter C. I'm going to save that. That has created the tag. I'm going to select all of them again, and now I can choose the tag. If you find that's a bit tricky, select them one at a time and choose coin from the drop down. So you've got our coins. They all now have the tag of coin. While we're here, let's grab our enemy and we're going to do exactly the same thing. Add a new tag, giving it a plus. This is called enemy, and save it. Notice that has a capital E. Selecting our enemy, choosing enemy. Doesn't matter what we call it, the name doesn't matter, but what matters is the tag. We can now change our code to say this, only do that if the thing we touched had the tag of coin. So in my case on line 12, if, open regular brackets, the other thing that we touched had a tag that was equal to, notice the double equals, that is not a typo, this is how you compare things. In double quotes, we want to do this if that thing was a coin, notice the uppercase C, the end of the line, a squiggly bracket. This is the one time that the autocomplete isn't very good. The autocomplete has just added a start and an end to our squiggly brackets, but I want the end down here. I want all of this to happen if this statement is true. So I can either delete that bracket it created and put another one here, in which case it will tidy everything up for me, or if you find it easier, literally select that squiggly bracket and move it down to the bottom. But that won't tidy things up quite so nicely for you. So what I tend to do is to delete that one, move down to the bottom of the block, and then put the bracket in. What we want to do though is also, if that other thing had a tag that was equal to enemy, do something else. So end of that line, down the line, if the other thing had a tag which was equal to enemy, end of the line, squiggly brackets. What we're going to say now is we're not going to destroy ourselves, because that would be the end of the game, and we're not going to destroy the enemy, though you could if you wanted to. What we're going to do is have the player's position restart, but to do that first we're going to make our health go down by 1. Now you can see here how the score went up by 1, and here we can make the health go down by 1, minus equals 1. And I'm just going to move this down the line so everything's a bit tidier. In that space there, we're going to say reset the player's position, but we'll come back to that in a second. Make sure you've saved it. What I now expect to see is with the player capsule selected, we can see our health, we can see our score, and walking over to the enemy, our health went down by 1, but because the enemy didn't despawn, I can keep walking into that thing. And there's nothing stopping me going into minus figures. But the score should go up by 1. Does that still work? Yes, it does. I don't know if you can see what I can see, but I've now got 2 restore up messages on my screen. That's not entirely useful. So let's just modify this nice and quickly. On my line 10, after my health, we're going to create a reference to a space in the world, which we call a transform. So we're going to create a public transform with an uppercase T, transform with an uppercase T, which I'm going to call start point. Notice the lowercase s, uppercase P, all one word. What I'm now going to do is when our health goes down when we touch the enemy, we're also going to make sure that the transform, lowercase t this time, transform.position, so that's the position of the player, this object, the object this script is attached to, is going to become the start point's position. And semicolon to say that you're done. So just to talk through that again, we're going to lose a point of health, which we know works, and we're going to take our position, we are the player, and set it to wherever the start point's position is. Now when I press play now, I expect a problem because it doesn't know where our start point is. So let's go and test this. I think when I touch this, it's going to throw a red error down here. Let's see if that's what we get. Yep, the variable start point has not been assigned. So we need something to be our starting point. And this doesn't have to be an object you can see. So I'm going to create an empty object. An empty object isn't visible, literally an invisible object. But I can move around and I can see where it is based on where the gizmo is. But you may find this really tricky to work with because it's literally invisible. If you want something that you can work with in the scene but won't appear in the game, you can change its icon here and give it an icon so it's got at least something you can work with. Doesn't matter what, something. And I'm going to give this an appropriate name of start. If you know what the next step is going to be, go do it. But we need to make sure that the player capsule, when we scroll down, knows that this start object is the point we want to restart back to. I'm going to grab start, put that in that slot, and if my test works, when I touch this enemy, I should jump back to there. Is that what happens? Not in the slightest. And that will be because for a number of different reasons. Probably because the player capsule doesn't work that way. So we may have to rethink this as a solution. Fade from black. I've had a day to think about this particular problem and I've solved it. So the issue here is character controller, which is a part of the player capsule. The character controller component here, each of these are called components, that is not doing what we want it to because we can't modify something's transform component while it has a character controller. But I have a sneaky solution. We're going to turn this off briefly, move the player to their starting point, and then turn it back on again. Now, we're going to do this through code. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to leave that switched on. You don't need to click that for your own work. But what we need to do here is this. I've already written the code out. So when we touch the enemy tag, our health should go down by 1, and this new line of code we didn't have before. We're going to get a component, and then inside of angle brackets, the character controller, which is the component we wish to get, and we're going to set its enabled property to equal false. We are disabling it. Then I'm moving the transform dot position to the start points position. So I'm grabbing it and moving it back to there by controlling its transform and controlling its position. And I'm going snap there. And then once that is done, I'm turning that feature back on. So that is turning the character controller enabled back to true. If you've done all of that, these are the behaviors we expect to see. It'll happen so quick the player won't notice it, but the player walks over here, they touch it, and it jumps back to the starting point. And you can see, perhaps up here in the character controller, very briefly it will switch off and switch back on, but it's happening so quickly I don't think anyone can see it. If you have a problem like mine where it's hopping a little bit, you could see that it was appearing and then hopping. I'm going to take that start point and move it perhaps down a little bit. What we're trying to do is line up the point of origin, so that's where the gizmo is, to where the player's start position wants to be. So I'm going to move that down. While we're here, it's worth mentioning how you know how the forward direction is. The blue arrow is forwards, the red arrow is right, and the green arrow is up. So you can use that to line up roughly where you want this to start. I'm going to give it another test, and am I happy with that as an outcome? That's better. And while the game is still playing, I can have a look at player capsule and I can see that our health has decreased down to from 1. Now it's 0, and then it will go into minus figures because we haven't told it to do something when we get to 0. So let's modify our code and change it even more. So what we're going to do here is when we subtract health, after we've done all of our resetting, we want it to do something. Now, whatever this something is going to be really basic. So we're going to write an if statement here that says if the health value is now less than or equal to 0, open squiggly bracket, close squiggly bracket, press enter a few times to give yourself some space. So if we've reached 0 or less health, we should restart the game. For simplicity, all we're going to do here is reset the scene. We're going to reload the scene. So if the player's gone around, they've collected a bunch of coins, it will revert everything back to the starting settings. To do that, we are going to call the scene manager. Scene manager. Notice this says, hey, you need to use Unity Engine.scene management to do this. So notice at the very top, I don't have scene management. But if I search for scene manager, let's type it out again, scene manager, and if I scroll up to the top, I should now see that we're using Unity Engine.scene management. If this code doesn't work for you, just make sure that's appeared at the top if it hasn't, add it on about line 6. So we're calling the scene manager and we're going to tell it to load a scene. Open close brackets, semicolon to say that you're done. Now this isn't a complete line of code because we need to write in there in double quotes what scene we intend to load. We can't say load the current scene, it doesn't know what that is. We need to say go find the scene. And we can find it by looking at the top. You can see that the playground scene is the one that's currently loaded. And I can double check that by going back into my starter assets, first person controller, scenes, playground. Now, because spelling matters, my advice here is right clicking, renaming, copying with Control and C, and then clicking off. So not actually renaming it, but being able to copy and paste that, just in case there's a random space on the end or there's a spelling that perhaps you might miss. I'm going to give that a save and we're going to give that a test. So I should get 3 jump back to the starts and then should restart the game. We're going to test We Never Trust. I'm going to collect a coin. I'm going to collect another coin. You can see my score's gone up, but it's currently in a strange position. I should be able to touch this spike pit, this object, twice and keep my score. 1, 2, and then on the third I should lose my score and those coins should reappear. There you go, and the coins are back, the level loaded. So we're currently in a good position for where we want to be. We've added static enemies and we have now restarted the player's position when they touch an enemy, and we are going to do a timer. So what we're going to do here is create a game object that's going to hold on to the timer, and you can do that by making a game object, an empty object, and call that timer for me. We're going to add a component to this, which we're also going to call timer. Create a new script, create and add, store it in the appropriate folder. And the job of this timer can either be to start at 0 and count up, or what we're going to do is start at a number and count down. This is going to be counted in seconds. So if you wanted a minute, this would be 60 or multiples of 60, your choice. So what we want to do here is delete from line 5 to line 9, which is the start function, but we are going to need the update function, and I'll tell you what that does in a minute. On line 5, we want to make a publicly accessible floating point value, which I'm going to call the time, which starts life at 60 because we start with a count of 60 seconds. Every update, which means every time the frame is recalculated, we're going to have the time minus equals, remember this means take away, 1. That, if I put semicolon to say that we're done, that is a completely valid line of code, but I'm going to show you why it's wrong. Some of you may have already clocked onto this, but we're going to subtract 1 every frame. Okay? If we play the game and I have a look at the timer, watch how quickly this goes from 60 to 0, and we're going to have a look at the other issue we're going to encounter as well. So you see that's gone down real quick. And if I click on the stats to my game, what you'll also notice is the frames per second matters. Because if you're on a really strong computer or a really weak computer, you're going to get a different number of frames per second being calculated. If I look at the floor, if I look at the sky, or I look at something really busy, that will change the frames per second. So back in our timer code, we don't want it to go by 1 per frame. We want it to go down by 1 per second. And you can work that out by timesing 1, so the star symbol for times, timesing that by time with an uppercase T dot delta time. Lowercase d, uppercase T, this will scale it to whatever your frame rate is. So this means it will always be go down by 1 every second. If you wanted to have it go down by 10 every second, just change that number. Let's give that a save. And we're going to give this a play, and hopefully this should go down by 10 per second. Not 10 per second, you know what I mean, 1 per second. So that's all well and good. We will later modify it so it restarts the game, but you can figure that out based on the code we've already done. And I'm going to reposition my score because it's currently off screen and I can't remember why. There it is. So I'm going to grab score and I'm going to move that more over because that looks a bit bleh over there. Okay, what we would now like to do, once we're in our view here, is we're going to create a new piece of text. This will be a child of the canvas. So you can right click on the existing canvas, create, and what we're going to create here is a new piece of user interface. So go down to UI and you want some Text Mesh Pro. You'll now see a new piece of text which you can position and it will snap to your other piece of text. One's managing your score, one's managing the time. We could name this appropriately to something like time UI or time output or time text. For now, I'm going to keep it deliberately poorly named so you get the joys of discovering why naming is important. I'm going to make sure this matches the same size, so I want that to be 45 because that's a nice round number. Let's have this be 45 as well. Just the same kind of code we did before. So I'm going back to our score script, or you can open it up. We would like another reference to a public Text Mesh Pro U GUI. And this is going to be, if we follow our naming convention from earlier, we had score output. Let's call this time output, semicolon, say that you're done. So what we're going to do here is, ooh, no, this lives in a different script. My fault. Got to copy that. Forgot we'd written a different script called timer for a second. Back to your timer script. So in your timer script, you would like a public Text Mesh Pro called time output, and it may add the using at the top if it isn't already there. What we now want to do is every time the frame is redrawn, so every time it updates, give yourself some space. We would now like to tell the time output to set its text to equal. Isn't that good? The autocomplete is getting so good. That's exactly what we want to do. Take the time, convert it to a string. I can press tab to accept that autocomplete, or I can type it out, but that's what I exactly wanted to do. Take the time, convert it to a string, and make sure that we've saved it. We are going to do one more thing here because I think we're in a position to adequately test it. We want to restart the game if we reach 0 time, exactly the same way we did with our score earlier. If I get to below 0, in this case it was health, for our time it's going to be 0 time, do this. I'm going to copy that because I've already got the code. I'm actually going to copy all of that because I've got the same code, but here I don't want it to be the health that we compare, I want it to compare against the time. You can copy that out manually if you prefer, but that's what I've just added in. If the time is less than or equal to 0, reset the playground. Okay, what you will find here is the time is going to look really awful on screen. You're going to get decimal numbers and it will look awful, as demonstrated by it breaking because we didn't set the instance of the object. Back to our player capsule. And you'll remember, if we don't set the instance of an object, oh, sorry, it was on the timer, my fault. On the timer object, if we don't set the instance, it doesn't know what to reference. It's referencing no text box, can't find the text box. So let's grab our second one. Would have been useful if we named it, wouldn't it? So you could tell the difference. But I'm going to grab the second one and put it into that time slot. Now, new text should change to whatever the time is, starting at 60, counting down with a bunch of decimal points in it. Doesn't that look wonderful? There's a bit of polish. All we're going to do now is round that number to the nearest whole number, because basically we just don't want that. Back to your timer code, and when I update the time and convert it to a string, I'm going to replace that entire section of code after the equals to say the time, and I would like to round that using a math function. Pains me to call it math, but the Americans wrote this. The math functions, mathf dot. Oh, isn't it good? We're going to round to the nearest integer, and the thing we want to round is the time. Isn't this autocomplete good? We're going to round to int, we're going to round the time to an int, and then we're going to convert that to a string. Save it, test it. Now what I expect is 60, 59, 58, etc. That's nicer. Now you can obviously test that by waiting 60 seconds, but you can speed things up just by setting this to, let's say, 5. Do we restart? Yes, we do. Okay. A few more bits I'd like to do. Displaying the timer on screen, we've now done. So we've added a little bit of polish by making that look better. We've made that text display the correct value. We've made it display in an appropriate way. So what we have right now is a game that has a first-person controller. We have collectibles. We make those collectibles despawn when we touch them. We make those collectibles increase a score. We display the score on screen. We add static enemies. We restart the player's position. We set up a timer. We display the timer on screen, and we've made it look better. Last thing I want to show you about your text, though, just to add that last little bit of polish, is you can customize the color of your text, but be careful which one you change. If you change this vertex color box here, it will affect just that text box. If you change the shader color, it will affect all of the text in your game to be the same color. So just be mindful of that. In the next couple of tutorials, we're going to look at how you can customize your font, how you can make this your own level. But if you have done any work in 3D Studio Max, or you've got some 3D asset you would like to pull into your game, or you'd like to further customize this from assets from the asset store, make for me now an interesting looking level using just these starting points. Thank you.